Everyone in the neighborhood called Freya Mother of Angels. She fed orphans, prayed louder than pastors, cried in church whenever children suffered. But every night, behind the locked bedroom door, her stepchildren Liam and Rowan begged God to survive until morning. What nobody knew was this: the husband had secretly installed cameras inside the house 3 months earlier, and what those cameras captured would destroy an entire family forever. This isn't just a story of a mean stepmother. It's a chilling look at a predator hiding in plain sight. Every Sunday morning, the neighborhood of Green Hill Estate woke to the smell of fresh mandazi drifting from Josh's compound. Children laughed near the gate. Gospel music floated softly through the open windows. The flower garden was always trimmed. The white curtains were always clean. The family looked like a picture taken from a perfect magazine. And at the center of it all stood Freya, the woman everybody admired. She moved through the neighborhood with graceful confidence, greeting old women respectfully, carrying food to sick neighbors, hugging church members warmly after service. She remembered birthdays. She contributed generously during funerals. She called everyone "my dear." People loved her. "Josh is lucky," women whispered. "She saved that family after his first wife died," others said. "She treats those children like her own." Even the local pastor praised her publicly. Nobody noticed how tightly the youngest child, Rowan, clung to the edge of her father's shirt whenever Freya entered the room. Nobody noticed how 12-year-old Liam stopped smiling whenever his stepmother touched his shoulder. Nobody noticed because Freya knew exactly how to perform kindness when people were watching, and she performed it perfectly. Josh believed it too. After losing his first wife Sophia to illness 3 years earlier, he had been drowning in grief. Raising 2 children alone while running his transport business nearly destroyed him emotionally. Then Freya appeared, soft-spoken, patient, helpful, beautiful. She entered their lives like healing rain after drought. At first, the children resisted her presence. Liam became quiet. Rowan cried often, but Freya handled every situation carefully whenever Josh was around. She cooked their favorite meals, helped with homework, braided Rowan's hair gently, and whenever the children complained about her, Josh blamed grief. "They're still adjusting," he told himself. He wanted peace. He needed peace. So he ignored the uneasiness growing silently inside his own house, because sometimes people do not believe warning signs when happiness finally returns. And Freya understood that weakness better than anyone. Freya understood something most people never learn. The quickest way to control a family is to first control how outsiders see you. Within 1 year, she became untouchable in the community. She joined the Women's Church Committee, started charity drives, visited hospitals with prayer groups, sponsored school supplies for poor children. People called her Mother Freya. At social gatherings, she always sat beside Josh, holding his hand gently while laughing softly at his jokes. She made him feel respected again, admired again, alive again. That admiration blinded him. What nobody saw was how different Freya became the moment visitors left. Her smile disappeared first. Then came the silence, heavy, cold, punishing silence. She rarely shouted in front of Josh. That was not her style. Freya preferred psychological control. She would ignore Rowan for days until the child cried from desperation. She hid Liam's school shoes before exams and pretended to help search for them. She whispered insults disguised as advice. "Your mother would be ashamed of how lazy you are. Maybe that's why God took her. You're becoming a burden to your father." The children suffered quietly because every time they tried explaining it to their father, Freya cried before they finished speaking, and her tears looked real. "Josh, I've sacrificed everything for this family," she sobbed one evening. "If the children hate me this much, maybe I should leave." Josh immediately comforted her. Liam watched silently from the staircase. That was the night he stopped trying to tell his father the truth. The red flags were never dramatic in the beginning. That's why Josh ignored them. Freya always insisted on controlling the children's schedules. She chose what they ate, when they slept, and who visited them, how long they could speak to relatives from Sophia's side of the family. She's just organized, Josh told himself. Then Liam's grades started dropping suddenly. The boy who once ranked among the best students became withdrawn and distracted. Freya blamed teenage behavior. She's probably right, Josh thought, but there were moments that disturbed him quietly. One afternoon, he returned home unexpectedly and found Rowan kneeling on the veranda under the hot sun. Her small knees were dusty, her face was swollen from crying. What happened? Josh asked. Before Rowan could answer, Freya spoke smoothly. She lied about finishing homework. Josh looked uncomfortable. The punishment seemed excessive. But Freya smiled calmly and said, "Children need discipline, Josh. The world is becoming dangerous." Later that night, Rowan whispered something that stayed in his mind. "Daddy, why does Auntie Freya hate us when you leave?" Josh froze, but seconds later, Freya entered carrying tea. And just like that, the moment disappeared. Because Josh wanted harmony more than confrontation, and Freya knew it. There was something unusual about Freya. She never slipped publicly, not once. At weddings, she danced joyfully. At funerals, she cried the loudest. At church, she quoted scripture flawlessly. She knew exactly what version of herself each audience needed. To elderly women, she appeared humble. To men, respectful. To children outside the home, nurturing. Even the neighbors defended her aggressively. One evening, Liam fought with another boy who insulted Rowan at school. When Josh heard about it, he expected Liam to be proud. Instead, the boy muttered quietly, "If people knew the truth, nobody would talk like that." Josh stared at him carefully. For a second, something inside him shifted, but Freya quickly interrupted the conversation. "You see how angry he's becoming?" She sighed sadly. "I'm really worried about him." She always redirected suspicion, always. And somehow, Josh always ended up comforting her instead. It happened during Rowan's birthday dinner. The house was full of guests. Neighbors laughed loudly in the sitting room, while children played outside with balloons. Freya moved around, serving food gracefully like the perfect mother everyone admired. Then Rowan accidentally spilled juice on Freya's expensive dress. The room went silent. For one brief second, Freya's face changed. Not disappointment, not irritation, hatred, pure hatred. Her eyes darkened so suddenly that Rowan stepped backward in fear. Josh saw it, only for 2 seconds, but he saw it. Then Freya smiled again instantly. "Oh, sweetheart, accidents happen," she said sweetly, while wiping the child's face gently. The guests praised her patience, but Josh couldn't forget Rowan trembling afterward. That night, he noticed the child sleeping with the bedroom lights on, and for the first time, Josh began wondering whether his children were afraid of his wife. That should have been the moment Josh confronted everything, but instead, he convinced himself he imagined it. Until 3 nights later, he heard crying behind the kitchen walls at exactly 2:13 a.m., and what he discovered there would become the first secret he never told Freya he knew. Josh woke suddenly to muffled sobbing. At first he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard it again, soft, painful, terrified. He checked the clock, 2:13 a.m. Beside him, Freya slept peacefully, or pretended to. Josh walked quietly through the dark hallway toward the kitchen area. The crying stopped immediately the moment the floor creaked. Silence swallowed the house. Then he noticed Rowan curled beneath the dining table, hugging herself tightly. "Rowan," The little girl flinched violently. Josh's heart sank. "Why are you here?" The child hesitated. Her lips trembled, but before she answered, footsteps approached behind him. Freya, wearing a sleepy expression. "Oh my God," she gasped softly. "She does this sometimes after nightmares." Rowan lowered her head instantly, too instantly, Josh noticed, and something cold moved through his chest. Weeks passed. Josh started observing things differently now. Small details. The children became tense whenever Freya entered rooms unexpectedly. Liam stopped eating dinner unless Josh sat beside him. Rowan developed the habit of hiding food inside napkins. One evening, Josh asked why. The child whispered quietly, "In case she refuses to feed us later." Josh stared at her in shock, but Freya laughed lightly before he could react. "Children exaggerate everything," she joked. Then she kissed Rowan's forehead, lovingly. Josh forced himself to laugh too, but deep inside, unease continued growing because the child's fear did not look fake at all. Freya sensed the change in Josh before he even spoke about it. She became more affectionate suddenly, more attentive, more romantic. She cooked his favorite meals, sent sweet messages during work, praised him constantly in public. And whenever he looked troubled, she turned the conversation toward his stress. "You've been overworking yourself. You're becoming paranoid lately. I think losing Sophia traumatized you more than you admit." Slowly, she planted doubt inside his mind. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe grief and stress were affecting him. Meanwhile, the children became quieter every day, especially Liam. The boy watched Freya carefully now, like prey studying a predator. And Freya noticed it too. One afternoon, Josh received a strange phone call from Rowan's teacher. "She's been falling asleep in class regularly," the teacher explained gently. Josh frowned. "That's impossible. She sleeps early." There was silence. Then the teacher added carefully, "She also seems frightened at sudden movements." Josh's stomach tightened. That evening, he confronted Freya calmly. Instead of anger, she burst into tears immediately. "I sacrificed everything for this family, and now even teachers are turning you against me." She cried so convincingly that Josh ended up apologizing again. But later that night, while Freya showered, Josh overheard Liam whispering to Rowan, "Don't tell Dad anymore. She'll punish us worse." Josh froze outside the door. His blood ran cold. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Josh returned home earlier than expected after a cancelled business meeting. The house was unusually quiet, too quiet. Then he heard it, a sharp slap, followed by Rowan screaming. Josh rushed toward the back corridor, and there, for the first time, he saw Freya without her mask, her face twisted with rage, one hand gripping Rowan's arm violently, the other raised again to strike. Liam stood frozen nearby, crying helplessly. Freya turned and saw Josh. Shock flashed across her face. Then instantly, the performance returned. "She was disrespecting me," Freya said breathlessly, but Josh barely heard her because Rowan's terrified expression said everything words could not. And for the first time since marrying Freya, Josh believed his children completely. That night, Josh pretended nothing had changed. He apologized to Freya, held her close, and even smiled during dinner. But inside, something had died. Because while Freya slept peacefully beside him, Josh sat awake in darkness, replaying Rowan's scream again and again. And before sunrise, he made a decision that would destroy his marriage forever. He was going to secretly install surveillance cameras inside his own house. What he would eventually record would horrify everyone who once called Freya the perfect stepmother. The rain fell heavily that night, not the soft, peaceful kind. This rain hit the iron sheets violently, like fists pounding against buried secrets, desperate to escape. Every sound inside the house felt sharper, the ticking wall clock, the humming refrigerator, Freya's slow breathing beside Josh in bed. But Josh could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rowan's terrified face, that scream, that fear, and worse than everything else, the realization that his own children had probably been suffering for years while he kept defending the woman hurting them. At 3:17 a.m., Josh quietly sat up. Freya shifted slightly beside him. His heart nearly stopped, but she only turned to the other side and continued sleeping peacefully. Josh stared at her in darkness. How many versions of this woman existed? The smiling wife at church, the caring neighbor, the affectionate woman who kissed him goodbye every morning, and the monster his children saw when nobody was watching. For the first time since their marriage, Josh felt afraid of the woman sleeping beside him, not physically, emotionally, or psychologically, because someone capable of pretending that perfectly was dangerous in ways bruises could never explain. And that night, Josh made a silent promise. He would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it became, even if it destroyed his family forever. 3 days later, Josh drove across town, pretending he had transport business meetings. Instead, he parked outside a discreet technology store hidden between two office buildings. The sign outside simply read, "Smart Home Solutions." Inside, the air smelled of electronics and fresh plastic packaging. Tiny blinking lights covered the walls. Security monitors displayed different camera feeds from homes, offices, and warehouses. Josh suddenly felt foolish standing there, like a paranoid husband from a crime film. A young technician approached politely. "How may I help you, sir?" Josh hesitated. His throat tightened, then quietly said, "I need indoor monitoring equipment." The technician immediately switched into professional mode. Within minutes, he was showing Josh compact 2026-era surveillance devices designed to blend naturally into ordinary household items. A smoke detector camera with night vision, a digital wall clock containing motion sensors, voice-sensitive audio recorders hidden inside charging adapters, miniature AI-assisted cameras, small enough to disappear inside bookshelf decorations. Josh stared silently. Technology had become terrifyingly invisible. The technician demonstrated live monitoring features through a phone application. The cameras could detect movement patterns, voice stress levels, sudden screaming, aggressive tone spikes, door openings, room inactivity. One device even generated automatic timestamps whenever raised voices or crying were detected. Josh's stomach twisted. Part of him still prayed he was wrong, that all this would only prove stress, misunderstandings, family adjustment problems. But another part of him already knew. The children's fear had been too real. Josh bought everything in cash. No receipts emailed, no family account notifications. As he walked back toward the car, carrying the equipment inside plain black bags, guilt weighed heavily on him because secretly monitoring his own home felt wrong, but failing to protect his children felt worse. Josh waited carefully for the perfect opportunity. Saturday afternoon, Freya attended a women's church conference across town. The children were visiting Sophia's older sister for the day. The house was finally empty. For the next 4 hours, Josh transformed his own home into something he never imagined possible, a surveillance zone. His hands shook while installing the first camera inside the sitting room smoke detector, then another inside the hallway clock, another facing the dining area, one near the kitchen entrance. Not bedrooms, never bedrooms. Even in suspicion, Josh refused to violate certain boundaries, but the common areas where most discipline happened, that was where he focused. The audio devices disturbed him most because, unlike cameras, sound captured emotion, tone, threats, fear, things people hid better visually. At one point, he paused beside the family photographs hanging near the staircase. Sophia's picture smiled softly from the wall. Josh stared at it for a long moment. "I failed them," he whispered painfully. The house felt strangely different after installation, like the walls themselves had become witnesses, silent witnesses, watching, recording, remembering. And deep down, Josh feared what they were about to reveal. That evening, Freya returned home glowing with warmth and laughter. She entered carrying church pamphlets and leftover cake from the conference. "Josh," she called sweetly, "you should have seen the women dancing today." She hugged him naturally, kissed his cheek, then immediately called the children into the dining room. "Come, babies, I brought treats." Josh watched carefully now, observed every movement, every smile, touch, and on camera, Freya looked exactly like the perfect stepmother the neighborhood adored. She served Rowan cake lovingly, helped Liam with homework, rubbed Josh's shoulders while asking about his day. At dinner, she laughed so genuinely, and even Josh briefly questioned himself again. Maybe he really had overreacted. Maybe stress had poisoned his thinking. Maybe that one violent moment was isolated anger. But later that night, after everyone slept, Josh opened the monitoring app for the first playback review, and what he saw shook him immediately. The moment he had driven away earlier that afternoon to collect fuel for the generator, Freya's entire body language changed. Instantly, the warmth vanished from her face like a switch had been turned off. Her shoulders stiffened, her eyes hardened, even her walking style changed. No smile, no softness, no patience. Within less than 30 seconds of his departure, the performance disappeared completely. Josh replayed the footage 3 times in disbelief. It was like watching 2 different women trapped inside one body. The next recording destroyed him further. Liam accidentally dropped a spoon during lunch. The metallic sound echoed lightly across the dining room. Freya turned slowly, and the room itself seemed to freeze. "Can't you do anything properly?" she snapped coldly. Liam apologized immediately, but Freya continued. "Your father works himself to death while you behave like useless animals." Rowan lowered her head silently. Josh watched from his office phone with growing horror. There was no audience now, no neighbors, no church members, no husband watching. Only the raw version of Freya existed on screen. The children barely spoke around her. Every movement looked calculated, careful, fearful, like prisoners studying the mood of a guard. Then came something even worse. Freya smiled casually while speaking, but her words carried deliberate poison. "You know why your father loves me more now?" she asked softly. Neither child answered. "Because I give him peace. Unlike your mother." Josh froze. His breathing became uneven. Sophia had been dead for 3 years, yet Freya was competing against a dead woman through her children, manipulating grief itself. The real breaking point came 4 nights later. Josh sat alone inside his parked car outside a client's office reviewing new footage before driving home. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Then, the kitchen audio activated automatically. Timestamp 8:42 p.m. Rowan's small voice trembled. "I tried my best," Freya interrupted sharply. "Your best is embarrassing." Then came the words Josh would never forget for the rest of his life. "You think your father would still choose you if your mother was alive?" Josh stopped breathing. On screen, Rowan looked shattered. Freya crouched beside her calmly, almost gently. That made it worse. Because cruelty, delivered softly, cuts deeper than screaming. "You children ruined his happiness for years," Freya whispered. "Now he finally has me." Rowan began crying quietly, and Freya smiled, not angrily, not emotionally, but with satisfaction. That was the moment Josh finally understood something terrifying. This cruelty was not accidental, not stress, not frustration, not parenting mistakes. It was calculated emotional destruction, intentional, systematic, carefully hidden. Josh's hands shook so violently he almost dropped the phone. For several seconds, he simply stared into darkness inside the car while rain hit the windshield heavily. His wife was psychologically torturing his children, and she enjoyed it. Josh wanted to storm home immediately. He wanted to confront her, expose her, scream at her. But then another thought entered his mind. If Freya could hide this level of cruelty so perfectly, exactly. What else was she hiding? And that terrifying question kept him sitting frozen in the car long after midnight. Because Josh was beginning to realize the surveillance cameras were not uncovering isolated abuse. They were uncovering a woman he may have never truly known at all. The following week became unbearable for Josh. Every day, he watched two completely different realities unfold. In the morning, Freya kissed him goodbye lovingly at the gate. Afternoon footage, she insulted the children for eating too slowly. In the evening, she prayed passionately during family devotion. Minutes after Josh left for emergency work calls, she mocked Rowan's appearance until the child cried silently. The contrast became psychologically disturbing. One recording especially haunted Josh deeply. At 6:11 p.m., Josh appeared on camera entering the house unexpectedly. Immediately, Freya's voice transformed mid-sentence. Seconds earlier, she had been saying, "You're both pathetic, just like your weak mother." Then the door opened. Instantly, "Oh babies, Daddy is home." Her smile appeared so naturally, it felt supernatural. Liam's expression during that moment terrified Josh most. The boy did not look surprised anymore. He looked accustomed to it, used to switching realities whenever his father entered rooms. Josh replayed that clip repeatedly, and for the first time in his life, he cried from guilt. Once Josh began paying attention carefully, he noticed Liam had been trying to communicate for months, maybe years. Small signals, tiny warnings hidden inside ordinary behavior. Whenever Freya entered rooms, Liam automatically stopped speaking. Whenever Josh defended Freya, Liam's eyes became empty, and on recordings, Josh discovered something heartbreaking. Liam protected Rowan constantly. The boy distracted Freya whenever she targeted his younger sister too harshly. He accepted blame for broken items, interrupted arguments intentionally, even skipped meals sometimes so Rowan could avoid punishment. One evening on camera, Rowan whispered fearfully, "Will Dad ever believe us?" Liam looked toward the doorway carefully before answering, "No." That single word crushed Josh completely because it carried years of disappointment inside it. The boy had already given up on being saved. One of the AI-assisted systems Josh installed included emotional aggression detection. At first, he ignored the feature until the app triggered a high-risk notification during a business meeting. Alert. Sustained verbal hostility detected. Josh immediately opened the live feed. Freya stood near the dining table speaking in a frighteningly calm voice. "You should thank me," she told Rowan. The child stood trembling silently. "If I wanted your father to hate you, I could do it very easily." Josh's chest tightened painfully. Freya continued folding laundry casually while speaking. "That man trusts me more than he trusts both of you combined." Rowan quietly whispered, "Please stop." Then Freya leaned closer and smiled. "That fear in your eyes is exactly why you behave properly." Josh nearly stood up in the middle of his meeting. His business partner asked if he was all right. Josh couldn't even answer, because for the first time, he was hearing evil spoken calmly, not dramatically, not violently, but intelligently, controlled cruelty, the most dangerous kind. That same night, Freya prepared Josh's favorite meal, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh juice. She laughed warmly during dinner, while Rowan barely touched food. At one point, Josh intentionally observed silently without speaking. The atmosphere changed immediately. The children became nervous. Freya noticed too, so she reached across the table dramatically and held Rowan's hand. "You've been quiet today, sweetheart. Are you okay?" The child forced a fake smile. Josh almost lost composure right there, because now he could see the manipulation clearly. Every gesture, every expression, every public performance. Freya was not simply hiding cruelty, she was carefully manufacturing innocence, and she had been doing it successfully for years. 3 nights later, the cameras captured something unexpected, something Freya never intended anyone to hear. She was on a phone call, laughing softly, relaxed, careless. Josh listened carefully through the audio feed. Then Freya said words that made his blood freeze completely. "I told you already," she chuckled quietly. "That man will believe anything I show him." Then another laugh. "The children are terrified of me now. They don't even try fighting back anymore." Josh's stomach twisted violently, but the worst came next. "You should see how easily people worship me at church," Freya continued proudly. "Nobody would ever suspect anything." Josh stared at the screen in horror, because for the first time, Freya herself admitted everything: the manipulation, the performance, the deception. And suddenly, Josh understood something terrifying. His wife wasn't losing control occasionally. She was fully aware of every cruel thing she was doing, and she believed she would never get caught. That night, Josh sat alone inside the dark living room while Freya slept upstairs peacefully. The surveillance recordings played repeatedly on his laptop. Hours of hidden cruelty, hours of fear, manipulation, psychological abuse, enough evidence to destroy Freya completely. But then, at 1:14 a.m., a new motion alert suddenly appeared on Josh's screen. Live feed activated. Hallway camera 02. Josh frowned. Everyone was supposed to be asleep. Then he watched in disbelief as Freya slowly stepped into the hallway wearing a robe. She looked around carefully, like someone checking whether they were being watched. Then she turned directly toward the hidden hallway clock camera and smiled. A long, knowing, terrifying smile, as if she somehow already knew the house was recording her. Josh did not sleep after seeing Freya stare into the hidden hallway camera. That smile haunted him until sunrise, not because it was loud, not because it was threatening, but because it looked confident, like a woman who believed she could survive any truth. At 5:42 a.m., Freya entered the bedroom carrying tea exactly the way she always did. Soft footsteps, gentle smile, warm voice. "You barely slept," she said carefully while placing the tray beside him. Josh forced himself to nod. "I had work stress." Freya touched his shoulder tenderly. "You work too hard for this family." Family, that word nearly broke him now, because every night the cameras revealed another layer of quiet destruction happening under his own roof. No bruises, no broken bones, no visible violence, only invisible wounds, the kind nobody outside the house could see, the kind that slowly erased confidence, joy, and identity until children no longer recognized themselves. And that morning, as Freya stood near the curtains, glowing in soft sunrise light, Josh realized something terrifying. Physical abuse leaves evidence, but psychological cruelty hides inside ordinary conversations, inside silence, inside tone, inside humiliation, disguised as discipline. And Freya had mastered it perfectly. The recordings revealed Freya rarely attacked the children aggressively at first. Instead, she separated them from everyone who made them feel safe. Slowly, carefully, strategically. Josh watched footage from weeks earlier. Rowan sat excitedly near the dining table, drawing a birthday card for Sophia's older sister, Aunt Sarah. She said, "I can visit again during school holidays." Rowan smiled softly. Freya's expression changed instantly, not visibly enough for outsiders to notice, but enough for the cameras to catch. "Oh," Freya replied casually while folding laundry. "Your aunt has been very busy lately. She told me to come," Rowan insisted. Freya sighed gently. "Sweetheart, adults sometimes say things just to avoid hurting children's feelings." The child's smile faded immediately. Josh paused the recording. That sentence sounded harmless, but it wasn't. Freya planted rejection carefully, quietly. She wanted the children to believe they were unwanted outside the house too. Days later, another recording showed Freya intercepting a phone call from Sophia's cousin. "She's bathing." Freya had to lie smoothly, while Rowan sat doing homework nearby. After hanging up, she casually announced, "People stop checking on children eventually. That's just life." Rowan lowered her head silently. Josh clenched his fists, watching the screen. Freya was not just controlling the house, she was shrinking the children's world until she became their only emotional authority. The most disturbing tactic Freya used was confusion. She constantly rewrote reality until the children stopped trusting their own feelings. One afternoon, Liam quietly confronted her on camera after she falsely blamed Rowan for breaking a glass cup. "You dropped it yourself," Liam muttered carefully. Freya turned slowly. "What did you say?" Liam hesitated but repeated himself. The room became painfully silent. Then Freya laughed softly, not angry, not loud. That soft laugh terrified Josh more than shouting ever could. "Liam," she said calmly, "you're becoming exactly like your mother." The boy froze, always emotional, always confused. Josh's chest tightened. Freya stepped closer. "You saw me cleaning the counter. You probably imagined the rest because you already dislike me." Liam looked uncertain suddenly, actually uncertain. Josh replayed the footage in disbelief. Within less than a minute, Freya had manipulated the conversation so completely the boy began doubting what he clearly witnessed himself. That was her gift, not violence, psychological distortion. By the end of the conversation, Liam apologized for telling the truth. Josh covered his face painfully. His children had been surviving mental warfare. The cameras also revealed something Josh never imagined. Freya controlled food emotionally, not enough to starve the children visibly. She was too intelligent for obvious abuse. Instead, she used meals to reinforce fear and obedience. When Josh was home, dinner felt warm and normal, balanced meals, laughter, conversation. But once he left, the atmosphere transforms. One recording showed Rowan quietly reaching for extra rice. Freya immediately slapped the serving spoon against the plate loudly. "You already ate enough." The child pulled her hand back quickly. "But I'm still hungry," Rowan whispered. Freya leaned closer. "Children who contribute nothing should not behave greedily." Josh's stomach twisted. Later that same night, cameras captured Rowan secretly drinking water repeatedly before sleeping, trying to fill hunger with water. Another recording showed Liam intentionally pretending he was full so Rowan could secretly eat part of his food later. The boy protected his sister constantly, and Freya knew it. Sometimes she intentionally punished one child just to emotionally destabilize the other, divide them, weaken them, control them. Rowan once loved singing. Josh remembered that clearly now. Sophia used to post videos proudly whenever Rowan sang at church events. But the cameras revealed why the child had suddenly stopped. One afternoon, Rowan practiced quietly for a school music presentation. Her voice was soft but beautiful. Freya listened silently from the doorway, then said, "You sound terrible." The child stopped immediately. "I'm trying," Rowan whispered. Freya shrugged. "Trying doesn't change reality." She walked away casually. That should have been the end. But Freya returned minutes later, carrying folded clothes. "You know what your problem is?" she continued calmly. "People praised you too much when you were younger." Rowan's eyes watered silently. "You're average. Accepting that would help you embarrass yourself less." Josh paused the recording. His heart physically hurt. Because Freya did not attack confidence suddenly. She eroded it slowly until the children no longer believed they were good at anything. Liam experienced the same thing. Whenever he succeeded academically, Freya minimized it. Other students scored higher. "You only passed because the exam was easy." Your father expected more. Nothing was ever enough. And eventually the children stopped trying to shine at all because Freya treated confidence like rebellion. The cruelest recordings were sometimes the quietest ones. Freya mastered emotional withdrawal better than anyone Josh had ever seen. If Rowan upset her, Freya simply acted as though the child no longer existed. No greetings, no responses, no eye contact, sometimes for entire days. One recording lasted almost 6 hours. Rowan repeatedly attempted speaking to her. "Auntie Freya, should I clean the dishes?" No reply. Can I help with cooking? No reply. The child eventually sat alone near the staircase, crying softly. Meanwhile, Freya moved through the house, peacefully humming worship songs. Josh nearly smashed the laptop because now he understood why Rowan constantly begged for approval. The child had been psychologically trained to fear emotional abandonment, and the worst part? Whenever Josh returned home, Freya instantly became affectionate again, which made the children look dramatic. Whenever they tried explaining the cruelty, there were no bruises to show, no screaming matches, no evidence outsiders could understand, only emotional suffocation hidden beneath politeness. By now, Josh had collected dozens of recordings, enough to expose Freya completely. But one terrifying question kept growing inside him. Why? Why would someone dedicate this much energy to emotionally destroying children? Then one night, while reviewing old footage, Josh noticed something strange hidden inside Freya's behavior. Every cruel comment, every manipulation, every punishment, somehow always connected back to one person, Sophia, the children's dead mother. And suddenly, Josh began wondering if Freya's hatred had started long before she ever entered their house. The realization came gradually. Freya was jealous of Sophia, not ordinary jealousy, obsessive jealousy, even though Sophia had been dead for years. The recordings proved it constantly. Whenever the children mentioned their mother positively, Freya's mood darkened almost immediately. One evening, Liam found an old family photo album while cleaning shelves. The children sat together quietly, smiling at pictures from earlier years. Then Freya entered. The warmth disappeared instantly. She was beautiful, Rowan whispered, while touching her mother's photo carefully. Freya stared at the album silently, then she laughed softly. Interesting how children only remember good things after people die. Liam looked up cautiously. Freya continued organizing flowers calmly. Your mother wasn't perfect the way you imagine. The room went cold. Rowan clutched the album tighter. Josh watched the footage repeatedly because Freya's face during that moment revealed something ugly, resentment, deep resentment, not towards the children alone, but also towards the memory of Sophia herself. Another pattern became obvious. Freya was obsessed over appearances. Reputation mattered more to her than anything else. Before church gatherings, she transformed the children into public decorations. Perfect clothes, forced smiles, carefully rehearsed behavior. One Sunday morning, she lined them up near the hallway mirror. What do we do in public? She asked calmly. Smile, Rowan answered softly. And we don't embarrass the family. Freya nodded approvingly. Josh's chest tightened painfully. The children were being trained like actors, not loved like children. Then Freya crouched beside Rowan and adjusted her collar gently. If anyone asks whether you're happy here, what do you say? The little girl answered automatically, yes. That single word shattered Josh because it sounded rehearsed, not natural, rehearsed. Liam spent 2 weeks building a science project. Josh remembered how excited he seemed, but the surveillance footage revealed what happened the night before submission. Liam carefully placed the finished project near the dining table before going to shower. Minutes later, Freya entered alone. She stared at the project silently, then, accidentally on purpose, knocked juice onto it. Josh stared at the footage in disbelief. The cardboard structure collapsed instantly. When Liam returned, he froze in horror. My project. Freya looked up casually from her phone. Oh no, she sighed. You should have placed it somewhere safer. Liam looked devastated. I worked on that for weeks. Freya shrugged. Life disappoints people. Learn to adapt. No apology, no guilt, nothing. Later that night, Liam cried quietly in bed while pretending to sleep. Josh had never seen his son cry like that before. And the most disturbing part? Freya appeared calmer afterward, almost satisfied, like damaging the boy's achievements brought her peace. One stormy evening, cameras recorded Liam comforting Rowan after another silent treatment punishment. The house was dark from a temporary power outage. Only emergency lights glowed faintly across the hallway. Rowan cried softly. Liam sat beside her, whispering carefully, "One day we'll leave this house." The little girl looked terrified. What if Dad gets angry? Liam's response broke Josh completely. "He doesn't see us anymore." Josh stopped breathing, not because the words were disrespectful, but because they were honest. Liam genuinely believed his father had abandoned them emotionally, and Josh realized, with crushing guilt, the boy wasn't entirely wrong. Later that same night, Josh reviewed another hallway recording. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Then, Freya entered the storage room carrying a small metal box. She looked around carefully before opening it. Inside were items belonging to Sophia: old letters, photographs, jewelry, family memories Josh thought had disappeared years ago. Josh leaned closer to the screen in confusion. Why did Freya secretly keep them hidden? Then he heard her whisper something softly while holding Sophia's wedding picture, something that made his blood freeze completely. "You should have stayed dead quietly." Josh stared at the screen in horror because the hatred in her voice no longer sounded like insecurity. It sounded personal, deeply personal, and for the first time, Josh began suspecting Freya's connection to Sophia's death might not be as innocent as everyone believed. At 2:07 a.m., Josh sat alone, replaying Freya's whisper over and over. "You should have stayed dead quietly." The sentence echoed inside his mind like poison. Then suddenly, another realization hit him. Sophia became seriously ill only 6 months after Freya entered their lives as a family friend. Josh's breathing slowed. Memories began rearranging themselves painfully. The hospital visits, the strange medications, Freya always volunteering to help. Freya was always nearby. And for the first time since beginning the surveillance, Josh stopped asking whether Freya was abusive. Instead, he began asking a far more terrifying question. What if Freya had planned everything from the very beginning? Josh stopped trusting his own memory. That frightened him most. Not the recordings, not Freya's hidden cruelty, not even the possibility that she hated Sophia long before the marriage. No, what terrified him was realizing how effectively Freya had manipulated reality around everyone, even him, especially him, because now that he reviewed the recordings carefully, Josh could see patterns he once ignored completely. The children were never difficult, never ungrateful, never emotionally unstable. They had been reacting to psychological pressure for years, and every reaction Freya caused, she later used as proof that something was wrong with them. That was her genius. She created emotional wounds, then presented herself as the exhausted victim trying to manage damaged children, and the world believed her, including Josh. The realization poisoned him with guilt, because suddenly, memories he once dismissed began returning differently. Liam's anger, Rowan's fear, the awkward silence whenever Freya entered rooms. Those were not behavioral problems, those were survival responses, and Freya had carefully turned those survival responses into evidence against them. The first gaslighting pattern became obvious during school meetings. Josh found old recordings from months earlier showing Freya preparing before parent-teacher conferences. Not emotionally preparing, strategically preparing. One afternoon, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, rehearsing facial expressions. Josh stared at the footage in disbelief. Soft concern, gentle sadness, patient exhaustion. She practiced them like an actress before a performance. Then came the school meeting itself. The camera inside Josh's car recorded their conversation afterward. Freya sighed heavily while fastening her seatbelt. "I'm trying so hard with Liam," she whispered emotionally. Josh remembered believing her completely that day. Back then, Liam's teacher had mentioned the boy becoming withdrawn and distracted in class. But now, after seeing the hidden footage from home, Josh understood what really happened. Freya had already spent weeks psychologically exhausting the child beforehand, limiting his sleep, mocking his confidence, creating tension daily. Then when Liam naturally struggled emotionally, Freya presented herself as the worried caretaker. She's trying her best, teachers told Josh, sympathetically. Nobody realized the problem inside the home was standing right in front of them. Freya even learned to weaponize vulnerability. I know they still miss their mother, she would say, sadly, while lowering her eyes. Maybe they resent me for trying to love them. Those words worked every time because society automatically trusted the calm adult over emotionally distressed children, and Freya understood that perfectly. One recording shattered Josh emotionally. It began with something small. Rowan accidentally spilled milk while setting the breakfast table. Freya exploded privately once Josh left for work. You ruin everything you touch. The child immediately began apologizing through tears. For nearly 20 minutes, Freya insulted her intelligence, clumsiness, and worth. By afternoon, Rowan sat quietly alone near the staircase, emotionally drained. Then Josh returned home unexpectedly early. Immediately, Freya transformed. Soft voice, gentle concern, perfect calmness. Meanwhile, Rowan, still emotionally shaken, barely responded during dinner. Josh remembered this night vividly because Freya had sighed sadly afterward and said, "You see how rude Rowan becomes lately. I'm really worried about her attitude." At the time, Josh agreed. Now watching the footage again, he nearly screamed. The child wasn't rude, she was emotionally exhausted. Freya deliberately provoked emotional reactions privately, then showcased the aftermath publicly. And because outsiders never saw the beginning, the children always looked like the problem. Freya also mastered conversational traps, especially with Rowan. She asked impossible questions designed to make the child look disrespectful no matter how she answered. One afternoon on camera, Freya sat beside Rowan during homework. "Do you think I'm a bad mother?" she asked softly. The child froze immediately. Josh watched carefully. Rowan looked terrified because both answers were dangerous. If she said yes, Freya would punish her later. If she said no, she would feel dishonest. "I don't know," Rowan whispered carefully. Freya's face darkened instantly. "You see," she muttered dramatically, "after everything I do for you." Minutes later, Josh arrived home. Freya immediately appeared emotional. "I try so hard with Rowan, but she keeps rejecting me." Josh remembered comforting Freya that evening, while Rowan sat silently nearby, looking guilty, even though she had done nothing wrong. The recordings made Josh physically sick now. Freya was psychologically cornering children until silence itself looked suspicious. Freya cried beautifully. That was the terrifying truth. Not fake dramatic crying, controlled crying. Carefully timed tears. Josh noticed she only cried in front of witnesses, never alone, never privately. One recording showed Liam finally gathering courage to confront her. "You always lie about us to Dad," he muttered angrily. For 1 second, Freya's expression became ice cold. Then, Josh's car headlights appeared through the curtains. Instantly, tears filled Freya's eyes. By the time Josh entered the sitting room, she already looked emotionally shattered. Liam stood there frustrated and angry. Freya whispered shakily, "I don't know why he hates me this much." Josh remembered exactly what happened next. He scolded Liam harshly. The boy tried explaining, but his frustration made him emotional, and Freya remained calm. That imbalance destroyed him because now Josh understood that Freya intentionally provoked emotional explosions from the children, then used their emotional reactions as evidence of instability. Meanwhile, her own calmness made her appear innocent. It was psychological warfare, and the children never stood a chance against an adult manipulating perception so expertly. The deeper Josh analyzed the footage, the more horrifying the manipulation became. Freya didn't only want outsiders to distrust the children, she wanted the children to distrust themselves too. One evening, Rowan searched desperately for a missing school assignment. I left it here, she whispered nervously. Freya folded clothes nearby calmly. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. You're becoming forgetful again. The child panicked. She searched the house repeatedly, crying softly, apologizing constantly. Finally, Freya found the assignment hidden beneath couch cushions, exactly where she herself had placed it earlier while Rowan showered. Josh had the footage proving it, but Rowan didn't know that. So the child genuinely believed her own memory was failing. That was Freya's strategy. Hide objects, deny conversations, rewrite events, slowly erode the children's trust in their own reality until they become easier to control. And the most heartbreaking part was that Liam had already started recognizing it. One recording showed him whispering privately to Rowan, "You're not crazy. She moves things on purpose." Josh broke down crying after hearing that sentence, because his son was trying to hold reality together for his little sister while he himself was still only a child. By now, Josh understood something terrifying, that Freya did not simply abuse the children emotionally. She was carefully building a public narrative, a story where she was the loving stepmother, sacrificing herself for two troubled children damaged by grief, and the children were being slowly transformed into unreliable witnesses nobody would believe. But then Josh uncovered something even darker. Freya wasn't only manipulating family and neighbors, she had already started manipulating professional authorities too. One Thursday afternoon, Josh received an automated school notification through email. Parent wellness consultation completed. He frowned immediately. He never attended any consultation. The surveillance recordings answered everything. Earlier that week, Freya secretly visited Rowan's school alone. The car camera captured part of her conversation afterward. "She's emotionally unstable lately," Freya told the teacher carefully. "Sometimes she invents stories when upset." Josh's blood froze. Freya was poisoning credibility in advance, preparing adults to doubt Rowan before the child even spoke. The strategy was horrifyingly intelligent. If Rowan later reported mistreatment, teachers would already suspect exaggeration. Freya even planted sympathy carefully. "I worry people will misunderstand me because I'm the stepmother," she sighed sadly. The teacher immediately reassured her, "You're doing your best." Josh gripped the steering wheel painfully while watching. The manipulation had spread beyond the house now. Teachers, church members, neighbors. Freya was building allies without them realizing it. Sunday afternoons became especially disturbing after Josh started reviewing recordings closely. Church women often visited unexpectedly, and Freya transformed the house into a theater instantly. Perfect snacks, warm laughter, gentle touches toward the children. But the emotional setup began before visitors arrived. One recording showed Freya kneeling beside Rowan before guests entered. "If you embarrass me today," she whispered, smiling, "you'll regret it later." Then seconds later, the church women walked inside. "Oh, my sweet Rowan," Freya exclaimed loudly while hugging the frightened child. The visitors smiled warmly. One woman even praised Freya openly. "Those children are blessed to have you." Josh watched Liam's face during that moment. The boy looked physically ill, not angry, exhausted, like someone trapped inside a lie too powerful to fight anymore. Later that evening, after the guests left, Freya's tone changed instantly. "You barely smiled today," she snapped at Rowan coldly. The child apologized repeatedly for not performing happiness convincingly enough. Josh uncovered another terrifying tactic weeks later. Freya began subtly implying the children had emotional disorders, not directly, carefully, strategically. One dinner conversation recorded by the dining room camera stunned him. "I read an article about unresolved grief in children," Freya told Josh thoughtfully while serving food. Liam immediately became tense. Freya continued softly. Sometimes trauma makes children hostile toward caregivers, even when the caregiver loves them. Josh remembered nodding sympathetically during that conversation months ago. At the time, it sounded reasonable. Now he understood another hidden purpose. Freya was planting psychological explanations for the children's fear, not abuse, not manipulation, trauma. That way, every frightened reaction became medicalized instead of investigated. Even worse, the children overheard these conversations repeatedly, and slowly they began wondering if maybe they really were broken. That was the deepest level of gaslighting, making victims believe their pain comes from themselves instead of the person hurting them. The annual family gathering finally revealed how advanced Freya's manipulation had become. Relatives filled the compound, laughing loudly beneath rented tents while meat roasted near the garden. To outsiders, the family looked beautiful, stable, happy. Freya moved through the crowd, gracefully greeting relatives, serving food, adjusting children's clothes lovingly. Then Liam quietly refused to greet one elderly uncle. The man laughed awkwardly. Teenagers these days. Immediately, Freya sighed sadly. "I'm really struggling with him lately," she whispered, just loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. Josh noticed several people glance toward Liam judgmentally. The boy heard it too. His shoulders dropped instantly. Later, another aunt approached Josh privately. "You need patience with that boy," she advised softly. "Freya tries so hard." Josh remembered agreeing at the time. Now, watching surveillance footage afterward, he saw the truth. Minutes before the gathering started, Freya privately humiliated Liam over his haircut until the boy withdrew emotionally. Then she used his emotional shutdown publicly as proof of behavioral problems. It was planned. Everything was planned. The most painful footage came unexpectedly late one night. Liam sat alone in the kitchen, believing everyone slept. The hallway camera captured him quietly, speaking into his dead mother's old photograph. Josh nearly stopped breathing while listening. "I'm trying," Liam whispered painfully. Then the boy's voice cracked. "But nobody believes us anymore." Josh's chest tightened violently. Liam wiped tears quickly. "She makes us look crazy." That sentence destroyed something inside Josh permanently. Because it was true, the children were losing reality itself, not only inside the home, but publicly too. Every emotional reaction became evidence against them. Every fear became an attitude. Every silence became disrespect. And the entire world kept praising the woman causing it. Josh sat frozen for hours after that recording ended, unable to move, unable to breathe normally, because for the first time he understood the full horror of psychological abuse. The victim eventually begins apologizing for being harmed. At 3:11 a.m., Josh replayed Liam's words again. "She makes us look crazy." Then suddenly, another memory surfaced. Months earlier, Freya once suggested family counseling. At the time, Josh thought she was trying to help, but now his blood ran cold. Because what if counseling was never meant to heal the children? What if Freya wanted official psychological records describing them as unstable? And as Josh opened old emails, searching frantically through past conversations, he found something that made his hands begin trembling instantly. A drafted message Freya never realized remained saved on the family computer. A message to a child behavioral specialist. And inside it, Freya described Liam as potentially dangerous. Josh sat alone in his study long after midnight. The house was silent. Outside, wind brushed softly against the trees lining the compound. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked before everything became quiet again. His laptop screen glowed in the darkness. Dozens of surveillance recordings filled the monitor. Hundreds of hours, hundreds of moments, hundreds of lies. At first, Josh believed he was gathering evidence of abuse. Now he realized he was witnessing something even more disturbing. Two completely different women. Not a good woman with occasional bad moments. Not a stressed wife making mistakes. No. The cameras had captured two separate identities: the woman the world adored and the woman hidden behind closed doors. The difference was so extreme, it sometimes felt impossible they were the same person. One version comforted crying neighbors. The other caused children to cry. One version quoted scripture about kindness. The other weaponized kindness to control people. One version smiled warmly. The other looked at children with emotional coldness that sent chills through Josh's body. The deeper he watched, the more frightening the contrast became. Because Freya wasn't losing control. She was controlling exactly what everyone saw. Sunday mornings were Freya's favorite stage. Josh noticed that pattern immediately. The church recordings showed a woman overflowing with warmth. As families gathered outside the sanctuary, Freya greeted everyone by name. She remembered birthdays, asked about sick relatives, held elderly women by the hand, knelt to hug small children. People gravitated toward her naturally. One particular Sunday, Josh reviewed footage from the church parking area captured by his vehicle camera. A widowed woman from the congregation was crying quietly after losing her brother. Freya immediately wrapped her arms around her. "Oh, my dear, you're not alone," she whispered. The grieving woman broke down completely. Nearby church members watched with admiration. One man even told Josh, "You are blessed to have such a compassionate wife." Josh remembered smiling proudly. Back then, he believed every word. The scene lasted nearly 15 minutes. Freya prayed with the woman, comforted her, wiped her tears, and promised to visit later that week. Everyone present looked touched by her kindness. Everyone except Josh now, because he had already seen the other recordings, and that knowledge transformed the scene into something terrifying. Not because Freya looked fake, because she looked genuine. That was what frightened him. The performance was flawless. The hidden hallway camera recorded Freya the moment they returned home. The contrast made Josh physically uncomfortable. Inside the church parking lot, she looked radiant, warm, compassionate, almost saintly, but less than 15 minutes after arriving home, everything changed. The smile vanished, not gradually, instantly, like someone turning off a light switch. Rowan accidentally forgot to remove her church shoes near the entrance. A small mistake. Nothing serious. Yet Freya stared at the shoes as though they personally offended her. "How many times must I repeat the same instruction?" she said coldly. The warmth was gone, completely gone. Her voice carried no affection, no patience, no humanity, only irritation. Rowan rushed to correct the mistake. "Sorry." Freya didn't answer. She simply walked away. The child visibly relaxed only after Freya disappeared into another room. Josh replayed the footage several times. The transition happened in under 20 seconds. 20 seconds. A church angel, then a household tyrant. The hidden lenses never lied. Weeks earlier, Freya organized a neighborhood food drive. The entire community praised her leadership. Josh reviewed the footage carefully. People smiled constantly around her. Children from struggling families hugged her. She distributed food packages personally, posed for photographs, spoke passionately about compassion. One elderly man blessed her publicly. Another woman called her an example of God's love. The admiration was overwhelming. Freya appeared humble throughout, never bragging, never seeking obvious attention. That made her even more believable. Because real manipulators rarely act arrogant, they act generous. After the event ended, several volunteers helped load supplies into Josh's vehicle. Everyone thanked Freya repeatedly. One young mother became emotional. "You've helped my family so much." Freya hugged her tightly. The woman cried. Josh remembered feeling proud that his wife inspired people, proud that his children had such a caring role model. Now those memories felt poisoned because he knew what happened later that evening. The hidden dining room camera captured Freya less than an hour after the charity event. Liam accidentally dropped a fork. The metal clattered against the floor. The sound barely lasted 2 seconds. Freya looked up immediately, not angry, not frustrated, cold, emotionally cold, the kind of coldness that felt practiced. "You attract problems everywhere you go," she said quietly. Liam froze. Josh stared at the recording. The sentence sounded small, almost harmless, but he had learned something important. Freya preferred psychological cuts, small wounds, repeated daily, carefully targeted. Liam picked up the fork silently. Nobody spoke. The room became heavy. Then Freya continued eating as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, the boy spent the remainder of dinner staring at his plate. Less than 1 hour earlier, she had comforted strangers. Now she was dismantling a child's confidence, one sentence at a time. Josh felt sick. What frightened Josh most wasn't the cruelty itself, it was consistent. The cameras never captured moments of genuine remorse. Never, not once. When Freya believed nobody important was watching, the emotional temperature remained the same, cold, controlled, detached. One afternoon, Rowan tripped while carrying laundry. The basket overturned, clothes scattered everywhere. The little girl immediately panicked. Josh expected concern, at least basic kindness. Instead, Freya stood over her silently, watching, not helping, just watching. Rowan struggled to gather the clothes while apologizing repeatedly. Finally, Freya spoke. "You make everything harder than it needs to be." Then she walked away. No shouting, no dramatic abuse, which somehow made it worse, because the indifference felt deliberate, calculated, as though Rowan's distress brought her satisfaction. Josh paused the recording. For a long moment, he simply stared at the screen, trying to understand how one human being could comfort strangers so effortlessly while showing so little compassion toward the children sharing her home. And then another realization struck him. The warmth wasn't disappearing accidentally. The warmth was being reserved strategically. The more footage Josh reviewed, the more one disturbing question refused to leave his mind. Why did Freya invest so much energy into impressing strangers? Why were neighbors receiving kindness that her own children never experienced? Then, while reviewing another recording, Josh noticed something he had completely overlooked. Freya wasn't just performing for admiration, she was collecting something: trust. And the amount of trust she had accumulated over the years was powerful enough to destroy anyone who challenged her, including the children. Josh began studying Freya's public interactions differently, like a detective, like a man trying to understand a criminal mind. And one pattern appeared repeatedly. Freya always made strong first impressions. Always. New neighbors, new teachers, new church members, new relatives. Within minutes, people loved her. She listened carefully, remembered details, offered help immediately. People felt seen around her, valued, important. The effect was remarkable. Within days, she could turn strangers into defenders. Josh watched one recording from a school function. A teacher who barely knew Freya spent 20 minutes praising her parenting efforts. The woman sounded sincere, genuinely sincere, which meant Freya's influence wasn't based on lies alone. It was based on calculated emotional investment. She gave people exactly what they wanted: attention, validation, kindness. And once they trusted her, they defended her automatically. The children never stood a chance because they were fighting against a reputation carefully built over years. One recording haunted Josh more than any other, not because of what Freya said, because of what she didn't say. The living room camera captured Rowan sitting quietly drawing. The child looked peaceful. For once, no mistakes, no arguments, no problems. Just a little girl drawing. Freya entered carrying folded laundry. She paused and simply watched Rowan for nearly 30 seconds. No words, no movement, just observation. Josh leaned closer to the screen. Something about her expression disturbed him deeply. Then he understood. There was no affection, none, no warmth, no connection, no maternal instinct. She looked at Rowan the way someone might examine furniture, an object, a problem, an obstacle. The moment lasted only seconds. Then Rowan looked up. Immediately, Freya smiled, a perfect smile, warm, friendly, convincing. The transformation was instant, but the hidden camera had already captured the truth. A month earlier, Josh hosted a business dinner at home. Important clients attended. The evening was flawless. Freya impressed everyone. Elegant table settings, perfect food, relaxed conversation. Several guests later told Josh how lucky he was. One businessman laughed. "If I wasn't married, I'd ask your wife for lessons." Everyone admired her. Everyone. The cameras recorded the entire evening, including what happened afterward. At midnight, the guests finally left. The house grew quiet. Josh helped carry dishes toward the kitchen. Freya smiled politely and thanked him, kissed his cheek. Then Josh received a late work call and stepped outside. The hidden kitchen camera continued recording. Within seconds, Freya's expression changed. She turned toward Liam. "Can you stop standing there uselessly?" The boy immediately began cleaning. No thank you, no appreciation, no kindness. The perfect hostess disappeared. Only the cold version remained. The hidden lens captured everything. The most heartbreaking discovery came from the children themselves. They knew, long before Josh did. One evening, Liam and Rowan sat together on the back veranda. The camera microphone barely captured their voices. Rowan looked confused. Why does she act differently around other people? Liam didn't answer immediately. He simply stared into the darkness, then quietly said, "Because that's the version they want to see." Josh froze. The boy had understood the situation years earlier. Years, while Josh remained blind. Rowan frowned. Which one is the real her? Liam looked toward the house, toward the glowing kitchen window, toward the woman inside, and whispered, "The one we get when nobody else is here." Josh lowered his head. His son had solved the mystery long before the surveillance ever began. Near midnight, Josh reviewed footage from an ordinary Wednesday. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no punishment, no shouting. Just Freya alone in the sitting room, reading, relaxing, believing herself completely unobserved. Then something unexpected happened. She noticed a framed family photograph on the shelf, a picture including Josh, Liam, Rowan, and Sophia, the first wife, the children's mother. Freya picked up the frame slowly and stared at it for a long time. Then her expression changed. The warmth disappeared, the friendliness disappeared, the charm disappeared. Only bitterness remained, pure bitterness. And in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "No matter how much they love you." She stared directly at Sophia's image. "I won." Josh's blood turned cold because for the first time he wasn't looking at a stepmother. He was looking at a rival, a woman competing against a dead mother whose cruelty might have been fueled by years of jealousy, who viewed the children not as family but as reminders, living reminders, and suddenly every recording felt far more dangerous than before because jealousy can create cruelty, but obsession can create something far worse. At 2:26 a.m., Josh replayed Freya's whisper again. "I won." The words echoed through the silent room. Then another notification appeared on the surveillance dashboard. Archived audio detected. Josh frowned. The system had flagged an older recording he had never reviewed, a recording captured months before the cameras officially started monitoring. The file had been recovered from a forgotten smart speaker backup. Curious, Josh clicked play. At first he heard only static, then voices, Freya's voice and another female voice, a conversation, a tense conversation. Then the unknown woman suddenly said something that made Josh's heart stop. "You were obsessed with Josh, even while Sophia was still alive." The recording ended abruptly, and for the first time, Josh realized Freya's connection to his family might have begun long before anyone ever suspected. Josh barely slept after listening to the recovered audio recording. The unknown woman's voice kept replaying in his head. You were obsessed with Josh even while Sophia was still alive. The sentence had opened a door he wasn't sure he wanted to walk through. Until now, he had been collecting evidence of cruelty, evidence of manipulation, evidence of emotional abuse. But this was different. This suggested history, a history Freya had never fully explained, a history that might stretch back years before Sophia's death. For the first time, Josh began revisiting old memories he had long buried, memories that once seemed ordinary, conversations, coincidences, unexpected appearances. Back then, everything made sense. Now, nothing did. And deep inside, a terrible feeling was beginning to grow. The kind of feeling a person gets when they realize the story they have believed for years may have been built on lies. The next few days would change everything, because among hundreds of recordings, thousands of minutes of footage, and dozens of hidden conversations, Josh was about to discover one piece of evidence so undeniable and so devastating that even the most desperate denial would no longer survive. The following Saturday, Freya left early for a church leadership retreat. Josh waited until her car disappeared beyond the gate. Then he walked upstairs toward the storage room, the same storage room where surveillance footage had captured Freya secretly examining Sophia's belongings. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight. Old suitcases lined the walls. Plastic containers sat stacked in corners. Family memories forgotten by time. Josh spent nearly an hour searching. Nothing unusual. Old blankets, unused decorations, photo albums. Then he found it, a small wooden box hidden beneath folded curtains. The box looked old, its lock was broken. His pulse quickened. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, some addressed to Sophia and others addressed to Freya, several dated years before Sophia became ill. Josh sat down immediately. His hands trembled because one name appeared repeatedly, his own, not as Freya's husband, but as someone Freya had been discussing long before he ever considered marrying her. Letter after letter revealed admiration that slowly transformed into obsession. At first, the comments seemed harmless. Josh is such a kind man. Sophia is very lucky. I wish I could find someone like him. Then the tone changed. Months later, the letters became darker, more personal, more emotional, more possessive. Josh felt his stomach tighten because these weren't written by a casual family friend. These were written by a woman who had spent years watching another woman's marriage from the sidelines and wanting it. At the bottom of the box lay an old envelope, yellow with age. Josh almost ignored it. Then he noticed Sophia's handwriting. He immediately opened it. A single photograph slid onto his lap. Josh froze. The picture showed a charity fundraiser held years earlier. Dozens of people stood together, smiling. Sophia stood near the center. Josh stood beside her. But that wasn't what caught his attention. Freya stood several rows behind them, watching, not smiling, watching. The camera had captured something unusual. Everyone else faced forward. Only Freya looked directly at Josh. The expression wasn't obvious. Most people would never notice. But Josh stared at the image for several minutes. The look unsettled him because it wasn't an admiration, it wasn't friendship, it wasn't even affection. It looked like longing mixed with resentment, as though she wanted something she couldn't have, something Sophia already possessed. The photograph felt less like a memory and more like evidence, evidence of a story nobody had understood at the time. That night, Josh began organizing everything. Letters, photos, recordings, recovered audio files. The deeper he dug, the more one pattern emerged. Freya constantly inserted herself into major moments of their lives. Sophia's birthday celebrations, hospital visits, family gatherings, school functions. She was always there, always nearby, always helpful. At first, it looked like friendship, but when Josh arranged the timeline carefully, a disturbing pattern emerged. The closer Sophia became to Freya, the more involved Freya became in their private family affairs. She knew their schedules, their routines, their arguments, their finances, their medical concerns. She knew everything, far more than an ordinary friend should know. Josh stared at the timeline spread across his desk. A chill moved through him because suddenly it felt less like friendship and more like infiltration. 3 nights later, another surveillance notification appeared. Kitchen camera at 8:17 p.m. Josh opened the file. Freya stood alone, washing dishes. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then her phone rang. She answered immediately. The conversation began casually. Small talk, church matters, community events. Then the caller asked about Liam and Rowan. Freya laughed quietly, a laugh Josh had learned to fear. "Those children," she replied. "I figured them out years ago." Josh stopped breathing. The caller laughed too. "What do you mean?" Freya continued drying dishes. "They were easier than people think." Josh's heart pounded. The caller asked another question. Then Freya answered with a sentence that made Josh's blood run cold. "Children only need one thing," she smiled. "Make them doubt themselves and they'll stop fighting." The plate slipped from Josh's hand. It shattered across the study floor because this wasn't interpretation anymore. This wasn't a suspicion, wasn't an assumption. This was a confession. For several minutes, Josh sat motionless. The recording remained paused on Freya's smiling face. His breathing became shallow. His chest hurt, not from anger, but from a heartbreak, because suddenly every memory came rushing back. Liam withdrew emotionally, Rowan hiding tears, school reports, family gatherings, missed warning signs, everything, every single thing. And for the first time, Josh fully understood what his children had endured. Not random cruelty, not occasional mistreatment, a deliberate campaign. Years of calculated psychological manipulation. Years. The realization crushed him. Liam had been telling the truth. Rowan had been telling the truth. And Josh, their father, had failed to believe them. He lowered his head into his hands, then cried harder than he had cried since Sophia's funeral. Josh now had enough evidence to destroy Freya's carefully constructed image forever. But fate wasn't finished revealing secrets, because hidden among the recovered audio archives, another file suddenly appeared. One that had been corrupted for years, a file recorded shortly before Sophia's illness began, and the voice speaking inside it was Sophia herself. Josh almost couldn't press play. Hearing Sophia's voice again felt impossible, painful, sacred. The recording crackled with static. Then her familiar voice filled the room, gentle, warm, alive. Josh immediately felt tears gathering. For several moments, Sophia discussed ordinary things, family plans, school fees, future vacations. Then her tone changed slightly, almost imperceptibly. "I don't know why," she said quietly. A pause followed. "Sometimes Freya makes me uncomfortable." Josh sat upright instantly. The recording continued. Sophia sounded uncertain, like someone trying to convince herself she was overreacting. "She's helpful, maybe too helpful. I don't know." Josh's heart pounded because Sophia had sensed something years ago, long before anyone else. The recording revealed it was actually a conversation between Sophia and her cousin Sarah. Sarah asked careful questions. Sophia answered honestly. Several times she mentioned small incidents. Nothing dramatic, nothing criminal, just uncomfortable moments, unexpected comments, odd behavior, strange possessiveness. Back then, none of it seemed important. Now every sentence felt significant. At one point, Sophia laughed nervously. "Sometimes I think Freya knows more about my marriage than I do." Sarah responded immediately, then stopped telling her everything. The room fell silent. Even years later, those words felt powerful because Sophia never got the chance. She continued trusting Freya, continued welcoming her into their lives, continued believing she had a friend. And now Josh wondered if that trust had been exploited from the very beginning. 3 days later, the surveillance system flagged another unusual recording, the hallway camera at 1:43 a.m. Freya believed everyone was asleep. She stood alone near the family photographs, the same photographs she often stared at secretly. This time she spoke aloud, not to anyone present, to herself. Josh listened carefully. Then came the words that ended every remaining doubt, every excuse, every possibility of misunderstanding. Freya looked directly at Sophia's photograph and whispered, "You had everything first." Silence. Then the husband. Another pause. The children. Her voice hardened. The life that should have been mine. Josh felt cold all over because at that moment, the entire story finally made sense. Not every mystery, not every question, but the motive, the resentment, the obsession, the cruelty, everything connected to that single wound. Jealousy, years of jealousy. The next morning, Josh couldn't look at himself in the mirror. Every reflection reminded him of failure, not because Freya deceived him, because Liam and Rowan had tried repeatedly to tell him the truth. He remembered their faces now, the hesitation, the fear, the disappointment, especially Liam. The boy had stopped asking for help long ago. That realization hurt most, because children stop asking for help only after believing nobody will listen. Josh sat in his office staring at old family photographs. His eyes eventually settled on Liam, then Rowan, and finally Sophia. Quietly he whispered, "I'm very sorry," not because anyone could hear him, because he needed to say it, even if it was years too late. That evening, he created a folder, one folder. Inside it, he placed everything: recordings, audio files, letters, photographs, timelines, witness notes, evidence. Months earlier, he had begun surveillance, hoping to answer a question. Now, he possessed enough proof to answer 100 questions. The folder grew larger with every upload. When he finally finished, he leaned back slowly. The file represented something much bigger than evidence. It represented the truth. The truth Freya had spent years hiding. The truth Liam and Rowan had suffered through. The truth Josh had refused to see. And once truth exists, it becomes difficult to bury forever. Near midnight, Josh locked the evidence folder and shut down his laptop. For the first time since installing the cameras, he believed the nightmare was finally approaching its end. Then his phone vibrated. Unknown number, a message appeared. Only one sentence, no greeting, no explanation. Just 7 chilling words. "If I were you, I'd stop digging." Josh stared at the screen. His pulse quickened. A second message arrived moments later. "Ask Freya what happened at St. Mary's Hospital." And suddenly, the story became far bigger than hidden cameras, broken children, and a deceptive stepmother. Because someone out there knew secrets that had never appeared on any recording, secrets connected to Sophia's final months alive. The message stayed on Josh's phone screen long after midnight. "Ask Freya what happened at St. Mary's Hospital." Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully. Inside Josh's chest, however, a storm was building. For months, the battle had remained hidden behind walls, behind cameras, behind passwords, behind secret recordings. The evidence existed only inside his laptop. Only he knew the full truth. Only he had seen the hours of manipulation. Only he had watched Freya transform from beloved community figure into a woman capable of emotionally destroying children when nobody else was watching. But now something else has changed. The truth was no longer staying inside the house. The moment Josh carried that evidence into the outside world, everything would change. The marriage, the family, the community, the church, the children's lives, and his own life. Once the truth became official, there would be no way back. No pretending, no second chances, no peaceful return to normal. The next morning, Josh made his decision. The evidence would leave the house, and once it did, Freya's carefully constructed world would begin collapsing. The law office occupied the 6th floor of a modern building overlooking the city. Josh arrived carrying a laptop bag that suddenly felt heavier than anything he had ever lifted, not because of the computer inside, because of what it contained. Months of recordings, of secrets, of suffering. The receptionist directed him into a conference room. The lawyer entered 10 minutes later, an older woman with sharp eyes and decades of experience. Josh immediately noticed something about her. She wasn't easily impressed, which somehow comforted him. For nearly 3 hours, Josh explained everything: the marriage, the children, the cameras, the recordings, the emotional abuse, the recovered files, the mysterious messages. The lawyer listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking precise questions. When Josh finally finished, silence filled the room. Then she spoke carefully. "You understand that once this begins, it won't stop." Josh nodded. "I know." The lawyer folded her hands. "Your wife will deny everything. I know. Some people will support her. I know. Others will attack you." Josh swallowed hard. "I know." The lawyer stared at him for several seconds, then quietly asked, "Do the children need protection?" Josh immediately answered, "Yes." No hesitation, no uncertainty, just yes. For the first time since this nightmare began, the answer felt absolutely clear. 3 days later, selected evidence was presented to child welfare investigators. Josh expected skepticism, resistance, and doubt. After all, Freya had fooled nearly everyone. Why would authorities be different? The investigators began reviewing footage inside a secure conference room. Josh sat silently nearby. The first recording played, then another, then another. Nobody spoke. The room gradually became quieter, more serious. One investigator paused a clip showing Freya emotionally humiliating Rowan. The woman removed her glasses slowly, then replayed the recording again and again. Finally, she looked toward Josh. "How long has this been happening?" Josh's throat tightened. "I don't know." The answer hurt because it was true. Nobody knew, not even the children. Abuse had become normal for them. The investigators continued watching, hour after hour. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the room had changed completely. Nobody questioned whether harm existed anymore. The only question was how extensive it had become. For the first time, outsiders were seeing exactly what Josh had seen, and the recordings were having the same effect on them: shock, disbelief, then anger. The most difficult day came when Liam and Rowan were interviewed separately. Josh waited outside, unable to sit still, unable to think clearly. The interviews lasted longer than expected, nearly 2 hours each. When Liam finally emerged, something about him looked different. Not happier, not relieved, just lighter, as though carrying a secret alone for years had exhausted him. Josh stood slowly. Their eyes met. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Liam quietly said, "They believed me." Josh nearly broke down right there, because the statement carried years of pain, years. "They helped me. They asked questions. They understood me. They believed me." The sentence exposed everything. The boy's greatest wound wasn't only what Freya had done. It was spending years unheard, years doubted, dismissed. And now someone finally listened. News travels strangely in communities. Nobody knows exactly where it starts, only that it spreads. Within days, whispers began appearing, questions, speculation, rumors. People noticed investigators visiting. Neighbors observed unusual activity. Someone saw Josh meeting lawyers. Someone else saw child welfare officers speaking with the children. The neighborhood conversation changed, at first quietly, then rapidly. What happened? Is everything okay? Why were officials there? Nobody knew the truth yet, but people sensed something. Josh dreaded the inevitable moment because Freya's public reputation remained powerful, very powerful. Most people still viewed her as the perfect stepmother, the generous church volunteer, the caring community leader, the compassionate wife. The truth had not reached them yet, only suspicion had, and suspicion creates chaos. For weeks Josh had hidden his growing knowledge carefully. Now that it has become impossible, Freya noticed changes, his distance, his silence, his caution. One evening she entered the bedroom carrying tea, something she often did, but this time her smile seemed strained, forced. She sat beside him. "Is something bothering you?" Josh looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time in years. The question felt surreal because she genuinely appeared concerned, genuinely. Anyone else would have believed it. Josh almost admired the performance, almost. Instead, he answered carefully, "Work." Freya studied him a little too long, too carefully, then nodded. But after she left the room, Josh opened the surveillance feed and watched Freya standing alone in the hallway, not smiling, not relaxed, watching the bedroom door, thinking, calculating. For the first time, Josh suspected she knew something was happening, and that realization frightened him because desperate people become dangerous. By now, authorities had reviewed enough evidence to take the matter seriously. The children had spoken, investigators had watched the recordings, lawyers were preparing documentation. The process had begun, but then another problem emerged, a dangerous one. Someone inside the community warned Freya that questions were being asked, and that night, for the first time since the cameras were installed, Freya began searching the house. The motion alerts arrived shortly after midnight. Josh was still awake. The notification appeared immediately. Hallway camera activated, kitchen camera activated, living room camera activated. Josh opened the feed. His pulse quickened. Freya was moving through the house, slowly, carefully, not cleaning, not organizing, searching. She opened cabinets, checked shelves, examined smoke detectors, studied wall clocks. Josh's stomach dropped. She was looking for something or someone. Then she stopped beneath the hallway camera, the same camera she had once smiled at. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she continued walking. Josh barely slept the rest of the night because one thing had become clear. Freya no longer felt secure, and insecure manipulators rarely surrender quietly. The first major social shockwave hit the church. Someone leaked information, nobody knew who, but suddenly questions spread through leadership circles. Several church members approached Josh privately, concerned, confused, defensive. Some refused to believe anything negative immediately, without hearing evidence, without asking questions. Not Freya. "It's impossible. She's one of the kindest women I know." Josh expected that reaction. The recordings had prepared him because that was exactly what made Freya so dangerous. Her public image wasn't fake. It was carefully cultivated. Many people had genuinely experienced kindness from her, which made accepting the darker reality almost impossible. Yet slowly, some began changing their minds, especially those who reviewed portions of the evidence. The recordings carried a power rumors never could, because cameras don't argue, they show, and what they showed was devastating. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor knocked on Josh's gate, a woman who had known the family for years. She looked uncomfortable, nervous, embarrassed. Josh invited her inside. For several moments, she struggled to speak, then finally said, "I owe Liam an apology." Josh remained silent. The woman lowered her eyes. "I thought he was disrespectful." A painful pause followed. "I thought he was becoming difficult." Another pause. Then tears appeared. "I didn't know." Josh felt something tighten in his chest because that sentence captured the entire tragedy. Nobody knew, not teachers, not neighbors, not relatives, not even him. The children had suffered publicly and privately at the same time. Publicly misunderstood, privately harmed. The combination was devastating. As legal preparations intensified, carefully selected evidence began reaching additional professionals, counselors, investigators, family advocates, legal advisors. Every review followed the same pattern: initial disbelief, followed by silence, then concern, then outrage. One child specialist spent nearly 4 hours reviewing recordings. Afterward, she sat quietly for several minutes. Finally, she said, "The abuse wasn't hidden. Josh looked confused. The specialist continued. It was disguised. The statement struck him deeply. Because she was right, the cruelty had existed in plain sight, wrapped inside concern, inside discipline, inside family life. The recording simply removed the disguise. Nothing more, nothing less. And once the disguise disappeared, the truth became impossible to ignore. The official notifications finally arrived. Legal proceedings were beginning. Protective measures were being discussed. Formal reviews had been approved. The process had moved beyond suspicion, beyond rumors, beyond private concerns. The evidence now existed inside official systems, official records, official investigations. Josh sat alone holding the documents. The papers felt strangely ordinary. Just ink, just signatures, just forms, yet they represented something enormous. For years, Freya controlled the narrative. For years, she shaped perception. For years, she decided what people believed. That power was ending, not because someone exposed her publicly, because the truth had finally been documented, verified, recorded, and preserved. No amount of charm could erase that. Late that evening, Josh returned home expecting another quiet night. Instead, he found something waiting on the dining room table, a single envelope, no stamp, no return address, just his name written neatly across the front. Inside was one photograph, only one. The picture showed Sophia during her final hospitalization at St. Mary's Hospital. Standing beside her bed was Freya, smiling, but on the back of the photograph, someone had written 7 chilling words. This wasn't where the story started. And underneath, another location, another date, a date from nearly 4 years before Sophia became sick. The date Freya first entered their lives, the date everything may have truly begun. The photograph remained on Josh's desk for 3 days. Every time he looked at it, the same thought returned. How many people had stood beside Freya over the years without seeing who she truly was? How many church members had hugged her? Neighbors had trusted her with their children. Grieving families had accepted her comfort. Teachers had believed her version of events. The number was staggering because Freya had never operated from the shadows. She had hidden in the safest place possible, the center of the community. She attended weddings, funerals, school functions, fundraisers, prayer meetings, neighborhood gatherings. People trusted her because they saw her everywhere. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore now. The predator had never hidden. She had simply learned how to look harmless, and that realization would soon shake the entire community. The first major leak happened on a Tuesday morning. Nobody knew who shared the information. Some believed it came from a legal office. Others blamed a church member. A few suspected one of Freya's former friends. What everyone agreed on was this. Within hours, the entire community was talking. Josh noticed it immediately. His phone would not stop vibrating. Calls, messages, questions, concern, rumors, shock. People wanted answers, not because they were curious, because they were confused. The woman they thought they knew no longer matched the woman described in the allegations. The difference was too extreme. Many initially rejected it. It cannot be true. Not Freya. There must be some misunderstanding. Yet every hour, new details surfaced. Not gossip, evidence, witness statements, professional reviews, recordings. Suddenly, people were forced to confront something uncomfortable. Sometimes monsters don't look dangerous. Sometimes they smile. They pray beside you. They volunteer at charity events. They sit next to you every Sunday. And that realization terrified people. The emergency meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. Church elders filled the conference room. Some looked angry, others looked heartbroken. Several appeared completely stunned. For years, Freya had been one of the most respected women in the congregation. Now they sat reviewing information that challenged everything they believed. One elder spoke first. "I don't understand." His voice sounded genuinely shaken. "I have known her for nearly 7 years. Another leader sighed heavily. "We all thought we knew her." Silence followed, heavy silence. Then portions of evidence were reviewed. Not everything, only enough to establish concern. The atmosphere changed quickly. Disbelief slowly gave way to discomfort. Discomfort slowly gave way to shock, because recordings removed the luxury of denial. People could no longer rely on opinions. The footage spoke for itself. A woman who publicly preached kindness, privately dismantling children's confidence, praised for compassion. A woman causing emotional harm behind closed doors. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. Several leaders cried, not because they doubted the evidence, because they finally believed it. Among all the reactions, one stood out. A woman named Rebecca, one of Freya's closest friends. For nearly a week she defended Freya fiercely. She challenged rumors, dismissed accusations, argued with anyone questioning Freya's character. Josh understood why. Rebecca genuinely loved her, trusted her, believed in her. Then she reviewed one recording, only one, a short clip, less than 5 minutes. The footage showed Rowan apologizing repeatedly, while Freya calmly humiliated her. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no violence, just quiet cruelty. When the recording ended, Rebecca sat silently for a long time. Then she asked to watch it again, and again and again. Finally, tears rolled down her face. Not loud tears, the quiet kind, the kind that comes when trust dies. "I defended her. Nobody answered." Rebecca covered her face. "I defended her everywhere." Josh felt no satisfaction watching her break down, only sadness, because Freya had not deceived strangers alone. She had deceived people who genuinely cared about her. Perhaps the hardest realization for the community involved Liam and Rowan. People began remembering things, old conversations, assumptions, judgments. Suddenly, neighbors looked at the children differently. The quiet boy they called rude, the anxious girl they called shy, the emotional reactions, the withdrawn behavior, the awkward silences. Everything made sense now. One teacher requested a meeting with Josh. She sat quietly for several moments before speaking. "I owe Liam an apology." Josh had heard similar words before, but hearing them again still hurts. The teacher looked devastated. "I thought he had behavioral problems." Her voice cracked. "He was asking for help." That truth spread quickly. Many adults began revisiting years of memories, and with each memory came guilt, because they now understood something painful. The children had never been the problem. The children had been evidence. Evidence nobody knew how to read. Word had spread. Questions were everywhere. Tension filled every conversation. Then came Sunday, and Freya showed up. The parking lot felt unusually quiet when she arrived. People noticed immediately. Conversation stopped. Eyes followed her, not openly, carefully, cautiously. Freya walked confidently toward the entrance. Her posture remained perfect. Her smile remained practiced. But something felt different. People no longer rushed toward her. No welcoming crowd. No warm greetings. No exciting conversations. For the first time in years, uncertainty surrounded her. Josh watched from a distance. Freya noticed it too. He could tell, because her eyes moved constantly, searching, measuring, calculating, trying to understand what people knew, trying to understand how much had changed. And deep down, she already sensed the truth. The mask was slipping. For years, Freya controlled every room she entered. People trusted her automatically, believed her automatically, defended her automatically. But trust, once broken, collapses quickly. And within days, the same community that once protected her would begin asking questions she could not answer. The school administration arranged a private meeting, not because of rumors, because of concern. Teachers who had interacted with the children for years attended. Several counselors participated as well. The conversation lasted most of the afternoon. People shared observations, patterns, memories, small incidents that once seemed meaningless. One teacher remembered Liam flinching whenever unexpected criticism occurred. Another recalled Rowan apologizing excessively for minor mistakes. A counselor described signs of chronic emotional stress. Individually, none of it seemed remarkable. Together, the pattern became undeniable. The room slowly filled with painful understanding. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms, evidence of a larger reality hidden beneath daily life. And many educators left that meeting carrying the same burden. The realization that they had witnessed warning signs without fully understanding them. Across the community, conversations changed. People gathered outside shops, at restaurants, community events. Everywhere, the same discussion emerged. How could nobody have noticed? The question appeared repeatedly. Yet, the answer remained painfully simple, because Freya gave people exactly what they expected to see. Kindness, generosity, patience. People rarely look beyond that. One elderly neighbor summed it up perfectly. We were looking at her reputation. He shook his head sadly. We weren't looking at the children. The statement spread because it felt true. For years, everyone focused on Freya's image. Almost nobody focused on Liam and Rowan's suffering. That realization haunted many people. As evidence continued surfacing, social consequences intensified. Organizations quietly began distancing themselves. Volunteer groups paused her involvement. Community committees removed her from leadership discussions. Church programs reassigned responsibilities. Nobody announced dramatic decisions publicly. Everything happened carefully, professionally. Yet the message remained clear. The trust that once protected Freya was disappearing, and she felt it. People who once called daily stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Warmer smiles became cautious nods. The social world she spent years building was beginning to crumble, not because of rumors, because credibility depends on trust, and trust had been shattered. One afternoon, Rebecca arrived at Freya's house. The same Rebecca who once defended her passionately, the same Rebecca who considered her family. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes, but afterward, Rebecca emerged visibly shaken. She never shared full details, only one statement that spread rapidly through the community. I gave her every opportunity to tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet people understood exactly what she meant, because even loyal friends eventually reach a point where evidence outweighs friendship, and many of Freya's closest supporters had reached that point. The final moment arrived quietly. No dramatic arrest scene, no shouting crowds, no public spectacle. Reality is often less dramatic than rumors, and somehow more powerful. Authorities completed the necessary procedures, protective arrangements were finalized, legal restrictions were implemented. Freya was formally removed from the household environment involving the children. When she left the property, the neighborhood watched from behind curtains and gates. Nobody celebrated, nobody cheered. The atmosphere felt strangely heavy because despite everything, people were witnessing the collapse of a life they thought they understood. Josh stood near the window. Liam stood beside him. Neither spoke. Outside, a vehicle slowly disappeared down the road. The silence afterward felt enormous. For the first time in years, the house seemed able to breathe. Most people believed the story was finally ending. The evidence had been presented. The community understood. The children were protected. Freya was gone. Case closed. At least that's what everyone thought. Then investigators reviewed older records connected to St. Mary's Hospital, discovered something unexpected. A discrepancy, small, almost invisible, but significant enough to trigger further review. And suddenly, attention shifted shifted away from the abuse case itself towards something buried much deeper in the past, something connected directly to Sophia. Weeks passed, yet conversations continued. The community struggled to process what had happened. Many people experienced the same unsettling realization. If Freya could fool them, who else might they be wrong about? Trust became a more complicated subject. Parents paid closer attention to their children. Teachers listened more carefully. Community leaders became more cautious. The case changed people, not through fear, through awareness, because everyone had learned the same lesson. Abuse does not always arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes it arrives looking admirable. One evening, Josh noticed something unusual. Liam was laughing, not forcing a smile, not pretending, actually laughing. The sound startled him because he realized how rarely he had heard it during recent years. Rowan laughed too. The atmosphere felt lighter, gentler, safer. No one walked on eggshells, no one monitored every word, no one anticipated criticism. The difference was impossible to miss, and for Josh, that simple evening became more powerful than any legal document because healing had finally begun. Many adults in the community carried private guilt. They replayed old interactions repeatedly, moments they dismissed, comments they ignored, signs they misunderstood. Some apologized directly, others struggled silently. One thing united them all, a desire not to make the same mistake again. The children's suffering had exposed weaknesses in how people judged situations. Too much trust in appearances, too little attention to behavior patterns, too much confidence in reputation, too little curiosity about hidden realities. Those lessons lingered long after the headlines faded. Late one night, Josh stood alone in the backyard. The stars stretched across the sky. The house behind him remained quiet, very peaceful. For the first time in years, he thought about Sophia, thought about Liam and Rowan, thought about every warning sign he had missed. Then he made a promise, not to investigators, not to lawyers, not even to himself, to his children. He would never again choose comfort over truth, never again choose appearances over reality. Never again ignore fear in their eyes simply because someone else appeared convincing. The promise felt overdue, but it was real. 3 days later, Josh received a call. The investigator's voice sounded unusually serious. "We need to meet." Josh immediately felt his stomach tighten. The meeting occurred that afternoon. A folder sat on the table. Inside were hospital records, archived reports, and old correspondence. The investigator opened the file carefully, then pointed toward a date, a specific date, the same date written on the back of the anonymous photograph. Josh stared silently. The investigator looked directly at him. What we're about to discuss. He paused and had nothing to do with the surveillance footage. Josh's pulse accelerated. The investigator continued. It concerns events that happened years before Sophia died. And at that moment, Josh realized the fall of Freya's public image might only be the beginning, because somewhere inside the past, another secret was waiting. And unlike the abuse hidden inside his home, this secret had remained buried for nearly a decade. The investigator's words remained in Josh's mind long after the meeting ended, but for the first time in months, another reality demanded his attention. Liam and Rowan, the children had survived years of emotional manipulation. The evidence had exposed the truth. The community finally believed them. Freya was gone. Yet something became painfully clear inside the quiet house. The nightmare was over. The damage wasn't. People often imagine healing begins the moment danger disappears. Josh learned differently. Removing the source of pain was only the first step. The children still carried the fear, the self-doubt, the anxiety, the habits they had developed simply to survive. And now began the hardest journey of all, teaching 2 wounded children that they were finally safe. The first night after Freya left felt strange, not peaceful, strange. Josh expected relief. Instead, the house felt cautious. like everyone was waiting for something. At dinner, Rowan barely touched her food. The table held her favorite meal, yet she ate slowly, watching, listening, almost expecting criticism. Josh noticed every movement. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked gently. Rowan immediately sat straighter. "I'm sorry." The answer hit him like a punch. He hadn't asked for an apology, yet it came automatically. Years of conditioning, years of believing every question might lead to punishment. Liam noticed it too. The boy lowered his fork. Nobody spoke for several moments. Then Josh quietly said something neither child expected. "You don't have to apologize." Rowan looked confused, genuinely confused, as though she didn't understand the sentence. Josh realized then how deep the damage truly ran. 3 nights later, Josh woke around midnight. A light glowed beneath Rowan's bedroom door. He knocked softly, no response. He entered carefully. The little girl sat awake on her bed, hugging a pillow. Her eyes looked exhausted. "Why can't you sleep?" She hesitated, then nodded. For several moments she remained silent. Finally she whispered, "What if she comes back?" The question broke his heart because it revealed the fear still living inside her. The danger was gone, but her mind hadn't caught up yet. Josh sat beside her. "We're safe." Rowan stared at the floor, not arguing, not agreeing, just struggling to believe it. That was when Josh understood something important. Trust wasn't returning overnight. Safety wasn't returning overnight. Both would have to be rebuilt slowly, one day at a time. The children's first counseling appointment happened the following week. The office felt warm, comfortable. Books lined the shelves. Soft chairs sat near large windows. Nothing intimidating, nothing clinical. The counselor greeted Liam and Rowan calmly, never rushing them, never forcing conversation. Josh remained outside during the first sessions, waiting, worrying, wondering what the children were saying. An hour later, Liam emerged. His expression remained serious, but different, lighter somehow. The counselor later spoke privately with Josh. Her words stayed with him. "Your children learn to survive by monitoring emotions." Josh frowned. She explained gently. They spent years trying to predict moods, reactions, criticism, and danger. Josh immediately recognized it. The constant caution, alertness, scanning of rooms. The children had become experts at emotional survival. Now they needed to learn something entirely new: how to relax. Weeks into counseling, Liam finally revealed something he had never told anyone. Not Josh, not teachers, not relatives, nobody. One evening, after returning from therapy, he sat on the back veranda watching the sunset. Josh joined him quietly. Neither spoke for a while. Then Liam finally said, "I thought it was my job." Josh looked confused. "My job to protect Rowan." The boy's voice remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm built from years of carrying heavy burdens. "If I wasn't around, she'd have nobody." Josh felt his chest tighten. Liam continued staring ahead. "I couldn't leave her alone." Suddenly, years of behavior made sense. The constant vigilance, maturity, exhaustion. Liam hadn't been acting like a child. He had been acting like a guardian. And that responsibility had cost him pieces of his own childhood. For months, Rowan rarely shared opinions. She preferred agreement, silently adapting, silently avoiding conflict. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, her dad asked where she wanted to eat lunch. The question seemed simple, normal, ordinary. Yet Rowan froze, as if she had been asked something complicated. "What do you want?" Josh repeated gently. The little girl stared at him, then quietly said, "I can choose?" Josh nearly cried, because the question revealed everything. For years, her preferences hadn't mattered, her feelings hadn't mattered, her choices hadn't mattered. Now she was slowly discovering something most children learn naturally. Her voice had value, her opinions mattered, and nobody was going to punish her for having them. As the children slowly began healing, counselors uncovered deeper wounds. wounds hidden beneath the obvious trauma, and one discovery would leave Josh carrying a new kind of guilt, because Liam and Rowan weren't only afraid of Freya. For a long time, they had also been afraid of him. The breakthrough happened nearly 2 months later. The counselor requested a joint session with Josh and Liam. At first, the conversation moved slowly, carefully. Then Liam said something that froze the room. "I stopped telling Dad things." Josh nodded sadly. He already knew that. But Liam wasn't finished, because when she lied, the boy swallowed hard. Dad always believed her. Silence followed. Painful silence. Nobody rushed to fill it. Josh felt tears forming, not because the statement was cruel, because it was true. Liam wasn't attacking him, he was explaining reality, the reality of a child who had tried repeatedly to be heard and eventually gave up. After that session, Josh stopped trying to defend himself, stopped explaining, stopped justifying, and instead, he listened, really listened. When the children shared painful memories, he didn't interrupt. When they expressed anger, he accepted it. When they described disappointments, he acknowledged them. Gradually, something changed. Tiny moments appeared, longer conversations, more eye contact, more honesty. The trust wasn't rebuilt through grand gestures, it grew through consistency, the same way damage had happened, one day at a time. The children's school became part of the healing process. Teachers received guidance, counselors provided support. Academic pressure was adjusted temporarily, not because the children were incapable, because healing required room to breathe. Liam's grades slowly improved and Rowan began participating more in class. Teachers noticed changes. The girl who once apologized constantly started raising her hand. The boy who sat silently at the back began engaging again. Progress came slowly, but it came, and every small victory mattered. One counselor suggested creating a memory box dedicated to Sophia, not grief. Connection, a place where the children could celebrate positive memories without fear. The idea transformed something inside the house. Photographs returned, stories returned, laughter returned. For years, Freya had turned Sophia's memory into a source of tension. Now it became something healing, something safe and shared. One evening, the family spent hours remembering old vacations, funny mistakes, birthday parties, favorite recipes. For the first time in years, Sophia's name brought smiles instead of anxiety. 3 months after Freya's removal, Josh walked into the living room unexpectedly. Liam and Rowan were laughing so hard neither could speak. The sound filled the house, pure, unfiltered, natural. Neither child noticed him immediately. They weren't monitoring reactions. They weren't waiting for criticism. They weren't preparing defenses. They were simply being children. Josh stood silently in the doorway, listening, and suddenly tears filled his eyes because he realized something. The house hadn't sounded like this in years, maybe longer, and that laughter became more meaningful than every legal victory because it proved something important. Healing had begun. Just when life finally seemed stable, the investigation into Sophia's past took an unexpected turn. The hospital records uncovered a witness, someone who remembered Freya from years earlier, someone who had stayed silent and now willing to talk. And according to that witness, Sophia had started asking dangerous questions shortly before she became seriously ill. Questions about Freya, questions nobody ever answered until now. For months, Josh had been chasing the truth. At first, he thought the truth would bring relief. Then he thought it would bring justice. Eventually, he learned something much harder. Truth brings responsibility. Once you know what happened, you can never unknow it. You can never return to comfortable ignorance. You can never pretend the warning signs were invisible. You can never erase the moments you failed the people who needed you most. And that reality followed Josh everywhere. Even after Freya left, even after investigators became involved, even after the evidence was accepted, even after the community finally understood. Because while Freya had caused the harm and Josh carried something else, which was guilt, the kind that keeps a man awake long after midnight, the kind that whispers questions no one else can hear. How did I miss it? Why didn't I listen? Why didn't I see what was happening? The answers never came easily, but healing rarely begins with answers. It begins with honesty, and Josh was finally ready to face his answers. The witness investigators discovered was a retired nurse from St. Mary's Hospital. Her name was Evelyn. For years, she remained silent because she believed her concerns were insignificant. Now, she understood they weren't. She sat across from investigators, holding old records and faded notes she had saved from years earlier. At first, her memories seemed ordinary. Then she described Freya not as Josh's wife, not as a respected community volunteer or as a beloved church member, but as a visitor who was frequent, a woman who appeared far too often during Sophia's final illness. Evelyn remembered something strange. Whenever Sophia was resting, Freya asked unusual questions. Personal questions about treatment schedules, medications, about who had access to patient information. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Now those memories felt different, far different. As investigators dug deeper, additional inconsistencies emerged. Old statements, conflicting timelines, hidden communications. The puzzle pieces finally began fitting together, and for the first time, Freya found herself unable to control the narrative. Freya entered the interview room carrying the same confidence she always used. The same calm smile, same carefully controlled posture. For years those tools worked and people believed her. But evidence changes conversations. The investigators were no longer asking questions. They already had answers and just wanted explanations. Hour after hour, they presented documents, recordings, statements, recovered messages, financial records, witness accounts. The smile slowly faded. The confidence slowly weakened. By evening, Freya looked exhausted, not physically, but emotionally, because manipulation only works when doubt exists, and the evidence had removed doubt. For the first time in years, Freya was trapped inside the truth. 3 weeks later, another interview took place. This one lasted nearly 6 hours. Near the end, something changed. Investigators later described it as a collapse. Not dramatic, not emotional, just exhaustion. Years of lies had become impossible to maintain. Freya lowered her head, then began speaking. Not about every allegation and not about every accusation, but enough to reveal the obsession that had consumed her for years, the jealousy, the resentment, the belief that Sophia lived the life she deserved, the belief that Josh should have been hers, the belief that the children stood between her and the family she wanted. When the recording ended, silence filled the room. Even investigators appeared shaken because obsession had destroyed everything, including Freya herself. News of Freya's arrest spread quickly, far faster than anyone expected. By afternoon, the entire community knew. People stood in stunned silence. Many refused to believe it at first. Others cried. Some became angry. Several simply sat quietly, trying to process reality. The woman they defended, they trusted, they admired, she is all gone and replaced by the truth. Josh watched the news coverage without satisfaction, without celebration or revenge, but only sadness, because nobody wins when a family reaches this point. Nobody. The arrest wasn't a victory. It was the final consequence of choices made years earlier, choices that destroy lives. A few days later, Josh sat alone at the dining table. One chair remained empty, Freya's chair. For years, that seat represented authority, control, fear. Now it represents consequences. Liam entered quietly, and then Rowan. The three sat together. Nobody spoke immediately. The silence felt different now, not fearful, but comfortable and safe. Josh looked around the room. For the first time in years, nobody seemed tense. Nobody seemed worried. Nobody seemed prepared for criticism. The house felt lighter and almost unfamiliar, and yet the empty chair reminded him that healing often begins after painful endings. Although Freya's arrest closed one chapter, another challenge remained. The children had survived. The danger had ended. But one question still haunted Josh. Would Liam and Rowan ever trust him again? And that answer could not be found in a courtroom. It could only be earned. One rainy evening, Josh gathered the courage to say what he had avoided for months. The three sat in the living room. No distractions, no television, no phones, only honesty. Josh looked at his children, then spoke. "I'm really sorry, my children." Liam immediately looked down. Rowan remained silent. Josh continued, "I should have listened to both of you." Tears filled his eyes. "I should have protected you sooner." The room became very quiet. "I can't change what happened." His voice cracked. "But I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the father you deserved." Nobody spoke. Then Rowan moved first, slowly and carefully. She wrapped her arms around him, and Josh broke down completely. Years of guilt finally pouring out. Recovery didn't happen in a single moment. It happened through ordinary days, breakfast conversations, school runs, movie nights, weekend walks, homework sessions, family dinners. Josh discovered he wasn't simply rebuilding trust. He was getting to know his children again, the real versions, not the frightened versions, not the guarded versions, but the real versions. Liam loved photography. Rowan wanted to sing again. Small discoveries became precious because trauma had hidden so much of who they were. Now those parts slowly returned. Years later, Liam stood on a graduation stage. The audience applauded, cameras flashed, families celebrated. Josh sat beside Rowan fighting tears, not because of academic success, because he remembered the boy who once believed nobody would ever believe him. The boy who carried adult burdens as a child. The boy who protected his sister when nobody protected him. Now he stood tall, confident, and strong. When Liam received his certificate, he looked directly towards his father and smiled a genuine smile, the kind that forgives without needing words. Josh would remember that moment forever. Rowan's healing arrived differently. One evening, she stood on a stage during a community music event. The same girl who once stopped singing because criticism convinced her she wasn't good enough. Now she stood before hundreds of people with confidence and unafraid. When the music began, her voice filled the hall. Beautiful, very powerful and clear. Josh felt tears sliding down his face, not because she sang perfectly, because she believed in herself again. And that victory meant more than any courtroom decision ever could. Years after everything ended, Josh wrote a letter, not to investigators, not to lawyers, not to reporters, but to Sophia. He placed it beside her photograph. Inside the letter, he admitted every mistake, every regret, lesson, promise. Then he wrote one final sentence. "I protected them too late, but I will never stop protecting them." He folded the letter carefully, and for the first time in many years, he felt peace. Many people expected this story to end with Freya's arrest. They were wrong, because the true ending was never about Freya. It was about Liam and Rowan. It was about a father who finally chose truth over comfort, and a family that refused to let pain define their future. 5 years later, the house looked different. Fresh paint, new furniture, new memories. But the greatest change couldn't be seen. It could only be felt. Laughter echoed through the rooms. Music drifted from Rowan's bedroom. Liam's photographs decorated the walls. Family dinners lasted longer. Conversations felt easier. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. The shadows were gone. One evening, Josh stood on the veranda watching the sunset, the same place where he once sat drowning in guilt. Now, he listened to laughter coming from inside. Liam teases Rowan while she argues back. Normal, healthy, beautiful, the sounds of a family healing. Josh smiled and then looked towards the sky. For a moment he thought about Sophia, about everything lost, everything survived, rebuilt, and quietly whispered, "We made it." Inside the house, laughter continued. Outside, the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, and for the first time in many years, the house finally felt like a home again. As the years passed and peace finally returned to Josh's home, one lesson remained stronger than all the others. Cruelty does not always arrive with shouting, violence, or obvious signs. Sometimes it hides behind smiles. Sometimes it hides behind good reputations. Sometimes it hides behind people everyone admires. That is why we must pay attention not only to what people say in public, but also to how the most vulnerable people around them are feeling. If a child suddenly becomes withdrawn, fearful, overly apologetic, anxious, or loses confidence in themselves, do not rush to label them as difficult or disrespectful. Ask questions, listen carefully. Their behavior may be telling a story their words are afraid to tell. If someone repeatedly dismisses a child's feelings, isolates them, constantly criticizes them, or makes them doubt their own reality, those are warning signs that should never be ignored. Emotional wounds may not leave visible scars, but they can last for years. Josh's greatest regret was not that Freya deceived him. His greatest regret was that his children tried to tell him the truth and he did not listen soon enough. The greatest lesson from this story is simple. Believe vulnerable people when they courageously share their fears. Pay attention to patterns, not appearances. Trust actions more than reputations. And never assume that a person is safe simply because they are respected by others. One caring conversation can save someone years of silent suffering. One moment of believing a child can change their entire future. And one person willing to stand up for the vulnerable can make all the difference. Because sometimes the most important words a hurting person will ever hear are, "I believe you." And sometimes those 4 words are where healing begins. Message to our viewers: if you ever suspect a child or vulnerable person is being harmed emotionally, take their concerns seriously and seek help from trusted family members, counselors, teachers, child protection professionals, or appropriate local authorities. Listening carefully and acting responsibly can make a life-changing difference.